Did you know who my father was? Michael Whitmore's voice was cold, sharp as broken glass. He stood in Margaret's cramped apartment, suit immaculate, eyes burning with suspicion. On the table between them torn interview documents, a business card, and the weight of an impossible accusation. What? No, my father owns shares in Riverside. The same company you interviewed with that morning. Margaret's face drained of color. Her hands trembled violently. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. You expect me to believe you just happened to help him? That you threw away your interview, your last chance for a stranger? Michael's voice cracked, hovering between fury and disbelief. Then why? Why did you stay? Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Her voice broke. Because 3 years ago, when my daughter was dying on that highway, a stranger stopped. She held Sarah's hand. And I never got to say thank you. Her words shattered the room. Michael froze. The anger drained from his face. I couldn't walk past your father. Not when I remembered what it meant. When someone stayed for mine. Ryan, I'm not doing this to prove I'm still useful. I'm doing it because we need the rent. Grandma, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Your mom would want you in college, not working night shifts. At 5:30 a.m., the air was cold and damp. Even before the alarm clock rang, Margaret was already awake in the darkness. She could hear the neighbor's cough through the thin wall, and the sound of the refrigerator motor filled the silence of the small apartment. She reached for the nightstand beside her bed. Under the dim streetlight, Sarah smiled from inside a picture frame. Her daughter's face, frozen forever in youth. Margaret habitually stroked her daughter's forehead in the photo with her thumb. The cold touch of the glass frame traveled from her fingertips to her chest. The hallway floor to the kitchen was worn and creaked with every step. This apartment, hastily moved into 3 years ago after Sarah died in a car accident with her grandson, Ryan, was enough for 2 bodies to lie down but far too cramped to dream in. On the sink sat bills stamped with red letters reading, "Final Notice." Electric bill, water bill, and rent due next week that could mean eviction if unpaid. Margaret sighed and opened the refrigerator, trying not to look at those papers. Inside was nearly empty. A few slices of drying ham, 1 apple, and 2 cookies Ryan had left from yesterday were all there was. She began packing Ryan's lunch with practiced hands. Cutting the crust off bread and inserting the thin ham, her knuckles were thick and rough. These were traces of the past 3 years working as a supermarket cashier, building cleaner, and Dawn flyer distributor, doing whatever work came her way. But none of those jobs counted as experience. They couldn't even be written on a resume. They were just labor for survival. On the living room sofa, Ryan lay asleep with his textbook open. His feet sticking out from the thin blanket had grown to adult size before she knew it. This boy worked nights moving boxes in a convenience store warehouse and wrote scholarship applications at dawn to keep going. To fulfill the promise to his dead mother. But reality was harsh. Margaret knew better than anyone that scholarships alone couldn't cover living expenses and dormitory fees. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, Margaret took a deep breath. Yesterday she had covered her graying hair with the cheapest dye from the pharmacy in dark brown. But the deep wrinkles around her eyes and sagging skin couldn't be hidden. She pulled out a black suit covered in plastic from deep in the closet. The outfit she had worn to her daughter's college graduation 20 years ago. A jacket with an outdated wide collar, sleeves that had become slightly short, and buttons that barely fastened. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a clown wearing ill-fitting clothes, but this was her only battle uniform. Today was the interview day for the program coordinator position at Riverside Community Center. Not simple manual labor, but a regular contract position. A job with guaranteed health insurance and accumulating retirement benefits literally guaranteed stability. Getting through the document screening at her age was itself a miracle. Margaret unfolded the crumpled interview question sheet again. The paper was tattered from being folded and unfolded hundreds of times. What contribution can you make to our organization? What are your strengths? Margaret practiced in front of the mirror, trying not to let her voice shake, as confidently as possible. But the answer in her heart was different from the model answer written on the paper. I have no choice. If not this position, my grandson will have to give up his dream. At 7:15, Ryan woke up with messy hair. Seeing the lunchbox on the table and his grandmother dressed in a suit, his eyes wavered. Grandma, will you really be okay? If I take on one more part-time job? Margaret firmly shook her head and straightened Ryan's clothes. Don't say that. You just study. You have a practice test today. But, Ryan, look at me. I'm still strong. Don't I look like a career woman in this suit? She tried to smile brightly, but the hand gripping her purse strap as she left through the front door was white with tension. When the door closed and Ryan was out of sight, her smile slowly faded. Under the gray sky, she muttered quietly, "Sarah, Mom will make it happen. Watch over me." The number 7 bus stopped at the station with its old engine rattling. The screech of the brakes sharply cut through the morning silence. Margaret boarded the bus with familiarity. It was the bus she used to take every morning when going to cleaning jobs, but today the steps felt unusually high. The driver nodded with an expressionless face, and Margaret tapped her transit card and headed inside. The bus interior was filled with commuting fatigue and heavy silence. Students with earphones blocking their ears, office workers absorbed in smartphone games, elderly people staring blankly out the window. No one gave each other a glance. It was as if invisible glass walls enclosed each person's seat. Margaret sat by the window and pulled out her interview question sheet from her bag again. The bus began picking up speed toward downtown. Familiar scenery passed quickly outside the car window. Margaret checked her wristwatch. 8:10 a.m. The interview location, Riverside Center, was 35 minutes away by bus. She would arrive at 8:45. Just the right amount of time to fix her appearance in the bathroom and calm her nerves. She leaned her head against the window to relax. You can do it. You're ready. Just as she was casting a spell on herself. Thud. A heavy, dull sound echoed through the bus floor. Following that, someone's suppressed groan could be heard. Ha. The bus lurched, and with the sudden stop, passengers' bodies tilted forward. What's going on? In the aisle of the front seat, a man had collapsed. An elderly man with white hair wearing a worn gray coat. George. The shopping bag that fell from his hand burst open, and a few oranges rolled across the bus floor. More seriously, small transparent plastic pill bottles were scattered beside them. George was clutching his chest, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. His face was turning ashen in an instant, and cold sweat poured down like rain. The bus driver grabbed the microphone with an irritated voice. What's going on back there? Is he drunk? A woman in her 20s sitting closest recoiled in disgust. Rather than worrying about the collapsed elderly man, she pulled her feet back, concerned that the oranges might touch her shoes. I don't know. He just fell over. Can someone call 911? Someone shouted, but no one moved. People only glanced at each other. Hands holding smartphones were busy filming this situation or checking the time instead of dialing 911. A man in a suit in the back seat clicked his tongue in annoyance. Oh great, now we're all gonna be late. Another passenger muttered. Can't we just, help him off and keep going? Cold reactions filled the bus. The collapsed George reached out his trembling hand into the air. His lips were beginning to turn blue. Help. My pills. Chest hurts. His voice was so small it could only be heard by those sitting right next to him. Margaret's gaze fixed on the pill bottles scattered on the floor. She squinted and read the label. Nitroglycerin, a medication cardiac patients take in emergency situations. Margaret's heart sank. That night 3 years ago came to mind. The highway in the rain. The crushed car. And her daughter Sarah's face growing cold on the emergency room bed. The doctor had said, a passing driver called it in and stayed with your daughter. She wasn't left alone. That stranger whose name she didn't know had stayed with Sarah in her final moments. The bus driver unbuckled his seatbelt, turned around, and said loudly, "Sir, can you stand? You need to get off if you can't stay in your seat. I have a schedule." The driver's words were cruel but realistic. The bus was stopped, and the cars following behind began honking. Beep, beep, beep. Angry horn sounds tore through the morning street. Margaret clenched her fists. Inside her hand, the interview question sheet crumpled. She looked at her watch. 8:16 a.m. Margaret's heart was pounding louder than the bus engine. She checked her wristwatch once more. She could almost hear the ticking of the second hand in her ears. 8:17 a.m. 43 minutes until the interview. From here to Riverside Center was at least 30 minutes even without traffic jams. If the bus didn't leave right now, she would be late. And she knew all too well. This interview was with an organization that valued punctuality above all else. The email had clearly stated it, late arrivals will not be accommodated. If you're late, there's no chance. Her gaze turned back to the collapsed George. The old man could barely even groan now, only gasping for breath. His face grew paler and paler, and his lips were turning blue. Clear symptoms of a heart attack. Someone else will do it. Margaret tried to turn her head away. There were young people on the bus. Strong men, people who might have medical knowledge. There was no reason for her, old and weak, to step up. Besides, she had Ryan. Ryan's future, the promise to her dead daughter, hung on this moment. Just then, her pocket vibrated. When she turned on the screen, there was a message from Ryan. "Good luck, Grandma. You got this. Mom would be so proud of you." Margaret's hand trembled. The words, "Mom would be proud," stabbed at her chest. What would Sarah have done? What would her daughter have done in this situation? Margaret closed her eyes. The answer was all too clear. Sarah would have jumped off without hesitation. But Sarah was dead, and Margaret had survived and had to take responsibility for her grandson. The atmosphere on the bus grew increasingly hostile. "Driver, we're all gonna be late because of this. Can't someone just drag him to the sidewalk?" At someone's words, several passengers nodded. Their eyes were filled not with empathy but with irritation. To them, George was not a person, but a cause of delay. An obstacle blocking the commute. A young man stood up and approached George. Margaret felt a moment of relief. Someone's helping. But instead of helping George, the man roughly shook his shoulder. "Hey, old man, can you walk?" George couldn't answer. He just gasped for breath while staring at the ceiling. The young man shouted to the bus driver. "He's out of it. Just open the door and I'll put him on the bench outside." Wait, someone tried to speak, but no one paid attention to that voice. Margaret tried to stand up abruptly. But her body was frozen. Her legs wouldn't move. In her head, only Ryan's face, the pile of bills, and the fact that this was her last chance kept circling. George faintly reached out his hand and muttered, "Please, my son. Daniel. Call him." That voice was so small only Margaret could hear it. She looked at George's trembling hand. Wrinkled hands, hands with protruding veins, hands slowly growing cold toward death. At that moment, memories from 3 years ago exploded. The rainy highway, Sarah bleeding inside the crumpled car. The police had told her later. A woman stopped her car and stayed with your daughter. She held her hand until the ambulance came. She didn't leave her alone. Margaret didn't know that person's face or name. But that person had stayed with her daughter in her final moments. Stopping their own time, their own schedule. Margaret's hands trembled. The interview question sheet crumpled with sweat. If I get off, my last chance in life disappears. But if I don't get off, this person might die. A passenger shouted to the bus driver. Look, he's breathing. He'll be fine. Let's just go. The driver hesitated and said, I already called 911. Ambulance is coming. Maybe we should wait. How long? 10 minutes? 20? We all have jobs. Cheers erupted. People's voices merged into one. Let's go. Let's go. Our time is more important. Margaret bit her lip. She tasted blood. She gripped her purse strap tightly. Ryan's face came to mind. Her grandson asleep on the sofa with his textbook open. The boy who stayed up all night writing scholarship applications. But at the same time, she heard Sarah's voice. Mom, if you can help, help. Don't wait for permission. Margaret's hand moved toward the stop button. Ding dong. The stop bell rang. The sharp sound pierced through the noise inside the bus. All eyes turned to Margaret. She slowly stood up from her seat. Her stiff knees creaked, but she didn't care. Wait, I'm getting off. Her voice was small but firm. The bus driver looked at her through the rearview mirror. You're getting off here, ma'am? Yes. Margaret walked down the swaying aisle and knelt beside George. Her suit pants got stained touching the wet floor, but she didn't care. She quickly gathered the scattered pill bottles. Her hands trembled but were precise. She placed her hand on George's neck to check his pulse. Weak but beating. His breathing was shallow and irregular. She checked the pill bottle label. Nitroglycerin. He's having a cardiac episode. She told the bus driver. He needs medical attention now. I'm staying with him until the ambulance comes. The bus driver looked troubled. Ma'am, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. But I'm doing it anyway. Margaret picked up her bag and supported George's arm. A sturdy young man sitting in the back reluctantly stood up to help. The two slowly lifted the semi-conscious George and moved him to the bus's back door. Careful. Support his head, Margaret instructed. Her voice held the confidence from her days working as a nursing assistant 30 years ago. The door opened. Cold morning air rushed into the bus. And at that moment, it began to rain. Lightly at first, then quickly growing heavier. Margaret and the young man carefully laid George on the station bench. The young man dusted off his hands and quickly climbed back onto the bus. Good luck, lady, he muttered, his voice mixed pity and relief. Pity for Margaret and relief that it wasn't him. Hiss. The bus door closed. With the sound of air releasing, the bus slowly departed. Through the windows, passengers' faces were visible. Some looked relieved, some looked down at Margaret with curious expressions. One woman took a photo with her smartphone. The red tail lights gradually grew distant. The bus turned the corner and disappeared completely. Margaret was left alone in the rain. No, left alone with a dying stranger. The rain instantly turned into a downpour. There was a station roof, but it was inadequate to block the driving rain. Margaret felt her carefully styled morning hair getting wet and sticking to her forehead. The dyed brown color mixed with rainwater and ran down the back of her neck. The 20-year-old suit absorbed the rainwater and grew heavy. She looked at her watch. 8:25 a.m. Looking at the departed bus, she thought, it's over. A stable future, Ryan's tuition, the promise to Sarah. Everything left with that bus. A sense of futility washed over her like waves. Her knees felt like they would give out. But she shook her head. There was no time for regret now. She took off her jacket. Her body in the thin blouse trembled with cold, but she covered George's body with the jacket. Hold on. You're going to be okay. I'm here. She held George's cold hand, remembering the warmth someone had given her daughter 3 years ago. Trials came all at once as if they had been waiting. Margaret took out her phone with trembling hands. Wiping the rain-soaked screen, she dialed 911 again. 911, what's your emergency? I called 10 minutes ago about a man having a heart attack on Elm Street. Where's the ambulance? The operator's voice was mechanical and indifferent. Ma'am, as I informed the previous caller, there is a multi-vehicle accident on Highway 5. All available units are responding to that scene. Your ambulance is delayed. How long? Estimated arrival time is 15 to 20 minutes. Margaret muttered desperately. 15 minutes. For a heart attack patient, 15 minutes was an eternity. Every minute, brain and heart tissue dies. She hung up and looked down at George. His breathing was getting shallower and shallower. She rummaged through her bag and pulled out a handkerchief. Wiping the sweat from George's forehead, she said quietly, "Stay with me. Help is coming. Just stay with me." The rain showed no sign of stopping. Even under the station roof, the wind drove the rain in. Margaret's blouse was completely soaked and stuck to her skin. The cold penetrated to her bones. Her lips began turning blue. Cars passed by. 1, 2, 3. But no one stopped. Margaret went out to the road and waved her hand. "Help, please. This man needs a hospital." A black sedan slowed down. A brief hope ignited in her chest. The window rolled down, and a middle-aged man in a suit stuck his head out. "What's wrong?" "This man is having a heart attack. Can you take us to the hospital? Please?" The man looked back and forth between Margaret in wet clothes and George lying on the bench. His expression subtly hardened. I can't. What if he dies in my car? Insurance won't cover that. I'm sorry." The window rolled up. The car sped away, splashing water. The splashed muddy water stained Margaret's white blouse. A second car came. An SUV. This time a young female driver. "Miss, please help us." The woman only rolled down the window slightly. "Did you call 911? "Yes, but they're delayed." "Then wait for them. I have kids in the back." "Sorry." The window closed. The car left. Third, fourth, fifth. All gave the same answer. "Sorry. Can't help. Call 911. Margaret stood in the middle of the road watching the departing cars. This was the world. A world unwilling to take responsibility, unwilling to get involved in others' misfortunes. A cold world. Then, her purse vibrated. It was an email notification. Margaret took out her phone with wet hands. A cruel message appeared on the screen. Riverside Community Center HR. Subject: interview cancellation notice. She opened the email with trembling fingers. "Dear Ms. Chen, we regret to inform you that since you were not present at the designated check-in time 8:45 a.m., your interview slot has been given to the next candidate. At Riverside, we value punctuality and reliability." Margaret didn't read any further. She pressed the phone to her chest. She felt like crying but held it in. Rain hit her face, and she couldn't tell if it was tears or rainwater. She slumped onto the bench. Her whole body trembled. She didn't know if it was from the cold or from despair. Then, a faint voice was heard. You should have gone." Margaret looked up. George had his eyes open. Faintly, but clearly. "You had to go somewhere," George said with difficulty. Margaret shook her head and squeezed his hand tighter. "No, I'm exactly where I need to be. I'm nobody, just an old man. You're somebody's father. That's enough for me." George's eyes welled up. His lips trembled. "Thank you, Ali Mrs. Patel." Right then, salvation came. Behind the station, the shutter of a small pharmacy rattled up. A woman ran out with an umbrella. "Mrs. Patel, the pharmacy owner. I've been watching from the window. What kind of city is this where cars just pass by?" She was carrying a thick blanket and a warm water bottle. "Here, take these, Mrs. Patel." Skillfully covered George with the blanket and held the umbrella over Margaret. "Thank you." Margaret's voice trembled. Mrs. Patel wrapped her arms around Margaret's wet shoulders. "My mother died on a street like this. Stroke. Nobody stopped. She laid there alone for 20 minutes. Her voice cracked. But you stopped. You stayed. That matters." Margaret bowed her head. Patel's warmth thawed her frozen body a little. "Let me call 911 again. I'll tell them it's critical." Patel took out her phone. From far away, very far away, the sound of a siren began to be heard. But the clock already showed 9:15 a.m. The interview time had long passed. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. Red lights flashed in the rain as it stopped in front of the station. The siren cut off, and 2 paramedics jumped out. "What happened?" a young male paramedic asked. Margaret explained quickly. "Cardiac episode. He collapsed on the bus about 30 minutes ago. He's on nitroglycerin, pulse was weak but steady. Breathing shallow." The paramedic looked at Margaret with surprise. "Are you medical personnel?" I was. Long time ago." Margaret answered and stepped back. While the paramedics transferred George to a stretcher, she slumped onto the bench. Her legs gave out. A female paramedic approached Margaret. "Ma'am, you're soaking wet. You need to get warm. Do you need medical attention?" Margaret shook her head. "No, I'm fine. Just take care of him." "Were you with him the whole time?" "Yes." The paramedic draped a foil blanket over Margaret's shoulders. "You probably saved his life." Another 10 minutes in. "Well, you did good." They loaded George into the ambulance. Just before the door closed, George faintly waved his hand. Margaret waved back. The ambulance left. The siren sound gradually faded. And silence came. Margaret was left alone at the rain-soaked station. Mrs. Patel had returned to the pharmacy, and the street returned to an ordinary morning. As if nothing had happened. She took out her phone. Ryan's text was on the screen. "How did it go? I'm thinking about you." Margaret's finger hovered over the keyboard. What should she say? Didn't make it to the interview. Grandma failed again. She couldn't bring herself to send a reply. Instead, she opened her email inbox. The rejection email from Riverside Community Center was still there. She read it slowly. "We value punctuality and reliability above all. Unfortunately, we cannot reschedule. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Future endeavors. What future? She gave a bitter smile. The next bus came. The number 7 bus. Same route. Different driver. Margaret boarded the bus. The seat became damp from her wet clothes, but no one cared. People just looked at their phones. The bus departed. Margaret stared blankly out the window. Raindrops ran down the glass. Like tears. She wondered if she should lie to Ryan. The interview went well. Results in a week. But she wasn't good at lying. Ryan would know just by looking into his grandmother's eyes. When the bus reached the station near home, the rain had stopped. The sky was still heavily overcast, but the rainfall had ceased. Margaret slowly walked home. Climbing the stairs was harder than usual. Her knees ached, and her whole body felt heavy. When she opened the front door, the apartment was quiet. Ryan had gone to school. She was alone in the living room. Margaret slumped onto the sofa. Without even taking off her wet clothes. She looked at Sarah's photo. Her daughter was smiling, forever in a happy expression. "Sarah, Mom messed up again." Her voice trembled. "I don't know what to tell Ryan." It was the last chance. The photo didn't answer. Margaret hung her head. She remembered what her late husband Tom used to say. "If you walk past someone in need, you walk past yourself. If you just walk past someone in need, you walk past yourself too." Tom always said that. And Sarah lived believing those words. Margaret closed her eyes. Did I do the right thing? Or was I just foolish? There was no answer. She took off her wet clothes and took a warm shower. Her body in the mirror looked old and exhausted. Bruised knees, wrinkled skin, graying hair showing through again. Margaret changed clothes and went to the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator. It was still empty. The bills were still piled on the sink. Nothing had changed. No, one thing had changed. Her last hope had disappeared. Margaret sat at the table and buried her head in her hands. And for the first time in 3 years, she cried out loud. 3 days passed. Margaret told Ryan the truth. That she didn't make it to the interview. That someone had collapsed on the bus and she helped. Ryan said nothing. He just hugged his grandmother tightly. It's okay, Grandma. We'll figure it out. But Margaret knew. There was nothing they could figure out. Ryan increased his convenience store hours, and Margaret started looking for cleaning jobs again. Thursday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Margaret opened it. A stranger stood there, a middle-aged man in a suit. His face clearly showed fatigue and tension. Are you Margaret Chen? Yes. Who are you? The man hesitated before speaking. My name is Michael Whitmore. I'm George's son. Margaret's eyes widened. George. Is he okay? Michael's expression became complicated. He's stable. Thanks to you. The doctors said if you hadn't been there. If you'd waited even 5 more minutes. He couldn't continue. Margaret sighed in relief. Thank goodness. I'm so relieved. Michael stared at her intently. His eyes held gratitude but also suspicion. May I come in? Margaret hesitated but opened the door. They sat on the living room sofa. Michael looked around. The worn furniture, cracked walls, piled bills. His gaze settled on Sarah's photo. Is that your daughter? Yes. She passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Silence flowed. Michael spoke. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you something. Yes? Did you know who my father was? Margaret frowned. What do you mean? Michael pulled documents from his bag. Paper with the Riverside Community Center letterhead. My father is a major shareholder of Riverside Community Holdings, the organization that runs the community center. The same place you had an interview that morning. Margaret's face paled. I didn't know. Michael's eyes sharpened. You expect me to believe that? You just happened to help him? On the same morning you had an interview with his company? Margaret stood up abruptly. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Michael stood up too. Then why? Why did you stay? You missed your interview. You lost your chance. For what? For a stranger? His voice held more confusion than anger. As if he couldn't understand. Margaret answered with a trembling voice. Because 3 years ago, when my daughter was dying on the highway, a stranger stopped. A woman I never met. She held Sarah's hand until the paramedics came. She didn't leave her alone. Tears flowed from her eyes. I never got to thank her. I don't even know her name. But she gave my daughter something precious in her last moments. She gave her presence. Someone who cared. Margaret clenched her fists. So when I saw your father on that bus, I saw Sarah. I saw someone's daughter, someone's father, dying alone while people looked away. And I couldn't walk past. Her voice cracked. Even if it cost me everything. Michael froze. The suspicion disappeared from his face. Instead, his eyes reddened. He slowly sat back down on the sofa. He covered his face with his hands. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. His voice trembled. My father almost died. And I was angry. I wanted someone to blame. I wanted to believe there was a reason, a scheme, something that made sense. He looked up. But you're just a good person. And I can't even comprehend that. Margaret slowly sat back down. Michael pulled out different documents from his bag. This is the interview record from Riverside. It says you were marked as no show. Margaret nodded. I got the email. It's okay. I understand. Michael tore up the documents. Margaret looked at him in surprise. What are you doing? Michael said. You didn't miss that interview. You were delayed due to a medical emergency. That's what the record will say. But, no buts. If you still want that job, come back next week. Properly. Through the front door. Margaret was speechless. I don't want charity. Michael looked her straight in the eyes. This isn't charity, Ms. Chen. This is me, giving you what you earned. You saved my father's life. The least I can do is give you a fair chance. He placed his business card on the table. Call this number on Monday. Ask for me. We'll schedule a proper interview. He stood and headed for the door. At the doorway, he turned back. And Ms. Chen? Yes? Thank you. For my father. For not walking past. The door closed. Margaret sat holding the business card for a long time, dazed. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled. Monday morning, Margaret made the call. With trembling hands, she dialed the number on Michael's business card. Riverside Community Holdings, how may I help you? I'm calling for Michael Whitmore. My name is Margaret Chen. One moment, please. After a brief hold tone, Michael's voice came through. Ms. Chen, I was hoping you'd call. I wanted to thank you. For the second chance. Don't thank me yet. You still have to earn it. His voice held a hint of laughter. Come in on Friday, 2 p.m. This time, it's a real interview. No favors. You'll meet with the full panel. Margaret took a deep breath. I'll be there. Good. And Ms. Chen? Yes? My father wants to meet you. After the interview, if you're willing. Margaret's eyes grew hot. I'd be honored. Friday came. Margaret wore the same black suit. But this time was different. Ryan had saved his allowance to buy her a new blouse. White, clean blouse. You look perfect, Grandma. Ryan said. Margaret hugged her grandson tightly. Your mom would be proud. She'd be proud of you. Margaret went to the bus stop. She took the same number 7 bus. The same driver. He recognized her. Hey, you're the lady who helped that old man. Margaret was surprised. You remember? Of course. It was all over the local news. Woman sacrifices job interview to save stranger. You're kind of famous around here. Margaret's face reddened. I just did what anyone should do. The driver shook his head. No, most people don't. That's why it's news. The bus arrived at Riverside Community Center on time. Margaret got off and looked up at the building. A modern glass building. It looked clean, bright, and hopeful. She took a deep breath and opened the door. At the reception desk, a young woman greeted her. Ms. Chen? We've been expecting you. Please follow me. They walked down the hallway to a conference room. The door opened. 3 people were seated. 2 middle-aged women and 1 man. Michael was one of them. He nodded with a professional expression. Ms. Chen, please have a seat. Margaret sat down. Her hands trembled, but this time it wasn't from fear. The first interviewer spoke. Ms. Chen, your resume shows a gap of several years. Can you explain that? Margaret gave her prepared answer. I was a caregiver. For my daughter, and then for my grandson after she passed. I worked part-time jobs to support us. The second interviewer asked. You're applying for a position typically filled by younger candidates. What makes you think you're suitable? Margaret paused for a moment. Then she decided to speak the truth instead of the prepared answer. I won't pretend I'm faster or more tech-savvy than a younger person. I'm not. She met each interviewer's eyes one by one. But I know what it means to serve a community. Because I am that community. I'm a widow, a grandmother, someone who's struggled to pay rent, to put food on the table, to keep hope alive. Her voice became firm. I've lived long enough to know that people don't need programs. They need someone who sees them. Someone who doesn't walk past when things get hard. Margaret continued. My resume might not be impressive. I don't have a fancy degree. But I have something you can't teach. I have 30 years of showing up. Of staying. Of caring when it's inconvenient. She placed her hands on the table. If you want someone who checks boxes, hire someone else. But if you want someone who'll fight for every single person who walks through that door, I'm here. Silence flowed. The third interviewer, Michael, smiled slightly. Thank you, Ms. Chen. We'll be in touch. Margaret stood up. They shook hands and she left. In the hallway, she exhaled. I did my best. Now all that's left is to wait for the result. The receptionist approached. Ms. Chen? Mr. Whitmore Sr. would like to see you. He's in the garden. Margaret followed the guidance to the garden behind the building. George was sitting on a bench. He looked much healthier. Color had returned to his face, and his eyes were clear. Ms. Chen. He stood and extended his hand. Margaret took his hand. It was warm. Please sit. They sat side by side. George spoke. I wanted to thank you. Properly. You don't need to. Yes, I do. You gave me my life back. More than that. You gave my son something he'd forgotten. What's that? Hope. In people. In kindness. George looked at the garden. Michael's been hurt before. Betrayed. He stopped trusting easily. But you reminded him that good people still exist. Margaret couldn't say anything. George continued. Whatever happens with the job, know this. You changed us. Both of us. He squeezed her hand tightly. Thank you. For not walking past. Tears flowed from Margaret's eyes. 3 days later, the phone rang. Ms. Chen? This is Jennifer from Riverside Hour. We'd like to offer you the position. Margaret sank onto the sofa. What? You start Monday. Welcome to the team. After hanging up, Margaret sat dazed for a long time. Then she looked at Sarah's photo. Sweetie, we did it. That night, Margaret and Ryan ordered Chinese food together. They laughed, talked, and for the first time in a long while, they talked about the future. Grandma, I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of you too, Ryan. Your mom would be too. Monday was Margaret's first day at work. She took the same number 7 bus. But this time was different. She was an employee. The first day at Riverside Community Center passed in a whirlwind. New faces, new programs, new responsibilities. But Margaret shined. She remembered people's names. She listened to their stories. She didn't just run programs, she cared for people. A month later, Michael visited her office. How are you settling in? Wonderfully. Thank you again. Michael sat down. I have a proposal. My father and I have been talking. We want to start a new initiative. What kind? A senior support program, transportation assistance, health checkups, community visits. We want to make sure no one else falls through the cracks. Margaret's eyes widened. That's incredible. We want you to lead it. Me? You understand what it's like. You've been there. You're perfect for it. Margaret held back tears. I'd be honored. 3 months passed. Margaret's program was successful. Dozens of elderly people received help. George participated as a volunteer. He visited other elderly people, shared stories, and laughed together. And the change was bigger. Riverside started a hiring preference policy for those over 50. They partnered with the local hospital. They collaborated with the bus company to start elderly safety training. A small choice created ripples. 6 months later, Margaret took the same number 7 bus to work. The scenery outside the window was familiar, but her heart was different. She was no longer afraid. No longer desperate. The bus passed Elm Street Station. That very station. The place where everything changed 6 months ago. Margaret looked out the window. Mrs. Patel's pharmacy was visible. She waved, and Patel also smiled and waved back. The bus continued forward. That afternoon, there was a big event at Riverside. A ceremony for the 6-month anniversary of the Senior Support Program. Local media came, and the city councilor attended. George took the stage and spoke. 6 months ago, I was collapsed on a bus floor, dying. People walked past, but one person stopped. He looked at Margaret in the audience. Margaret Chen. She sacrificed her future to save a stranger. And that choice changed all of us. Applause erupted. After the event, Margaret took the bus again. It was the commute home. Inside the bus was peaceful. People looked tired but quiet. Then it happened. A woman in the front seat swayed. She was pregnant. Her face paled and her body tilted. The bus stopped. A moment of silence. And a young man stood up abruptly. He looked at his watch. He hesitated. His eyes met Margaret's. The young man took a deep breath. And pressed the stop bell. I'll help her. You guys can go ahead. He supported the woman. The bus door opened. He got off with the woman. Another passenger stood up. Wait, I'll call 911. He also got off. The bus left. Margaret looked out the window. The young man and the passenger were helping the woman sit on the station bench. Margaret smiled. The bus arrived at her stop. She got off and walked home. When she opened the apartment door, Ryan greeted her. Grandma, guess what? I got the scholarship. Margaret hugged her grandson tightly. Your mom would be so proud. That night, Margaret looked out the window. The city lights sparkled. Behind each light was a person. A story. A choice. She picked up Sarah's photo. Sweetie, Mom did it. I lived the way you taught me. She kissed the photo. And muttered quietly, maybe the world doesn't change all at once. Maybe it changes, one person at a time. One choice at a time. One moment of courage at a time. Outside the window, the sound of a bus was heard. The number 7 bus was running through the night road. Inside were more people, more stories. And someday, one of them would also stop. Would choose. Would stay. Like Margaret. My grandmother taught me something that day. She taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and showing up anyway. She showed up for a stranger. That stranger's son showed up for her. And now, she shows up for hundreds. That's what heroes do. They don't wear capes. They don't have superpowers. They just stop the bus. And sometimes, stopping the bus changes everything. Sometimes, the smallest act of courage creates the biggest change. Margaret's choice to stop the bus didn't just save one life, it transformed an entire community. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more inspiring stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Thank you for watching, and remember, you never know when your moment to stop the bus will come. Will you be ready?